Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. A veteran firefighter risked his life to save a woman drowning in a deadly flood. But days later, he lost everything. His career was destroyed, his name was dragged through the mud, and the very forest he had protected for nearly 20 years became the target of a ruthless conspiracy. What he didn't know was that the woman he rescued carried a secret powerful enough to change all of their lives forever. Stay with me until the end, because this incredible story proves that one act of kindness can become the greatest test of your life, and perhaps the very miracle God had planned all along. Gray clouds hung so low they seemed to scrape the tops of the pines, while swollen water swallowed everything the forest had once called solid ground. Caleb Brooks opened his eyes before dawn without an alarm. He hadn't needed one in nearly 20 years. The forest had become his clock. The wind decided when he woke. Rain decided how long he worked. Smoke decided whether he slept. At 43, Caleb was captain of a remote wildland fire station tucked deep inside a protected forest where visitors were rare, cell service didn't exist, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Most people imagined firefighters battling towering flames. Very few ever thought about what came after. Floods, mudslides, fallen bridges, rivers swollen with burned soil that no longer knew how to hold the rain. Those disasters belonged to men like Caleb. He swung his boots onto the wooden floor, listening. The cabin trembled. Not from wind, from water. He stood and walked onto the porch. The creek behind the station had become a raging brown river overnight. Logs rolled through the current like giant matchsticks. Entire sections of fencing disappeared beneath churning water. Another day like this, the access road would vanish completely. Caleb said the words aloud simply because silence had become too familiar. When a man lived alone long enough, hearing his own voice reminded him he still belonged to the living. He climbed into his weathered rescue truck and drove toward the boathouse. Every movement followed the same routine he'd repeated thousands of times. Fuel, medical kit, emergency rope, satellite radio, rescue boat. The routine wasn't boring, it was survival. His late wife used to tease him about it. You could probably rescue someone blindfolded. The memory arrived without warning. Then, just as quickly, it disappeared into the rain. 3 years had passed since cancer stole her away. 3 years since his daughter Emma packed her belongings, looked him straight in the eyes, and said words he still heard every night. "You loved this forest more than you ever loved us." She drove away before sunrise. Neither of them had called since. Caleb often wondered whether she still carried his last name with pride, or only out of habit. The rescue boat cut through flooded timber as he followed the usual inspection route. Everything looked wrong. Creeks flowed backward. Trails had become rivers. The fire breaks he'd maintained for years were now hidden beneath muddy water. He checked damaged observation towers, floating debris and washed-out culverts, recording every detail in his waterproof notebook. Documentation mattered. Because someday, someone would question everything. They always did. Half an hour later, he slowed near an abandoned service landing. Something caught his attention. Deep tire tracks. Fresh. Not from emergency crews, not from park vehicles. These belonged to a powerful off-road machine. Nearby were unmistakable grooves left by a lightweight speedboat. Caleb killed the engine. The forest instantly fell into an eerie silence broken only by rushing water. He crouched beside the muddy bank. The tread pattern was expensive, aggressive, brand new. Nobody living nearby owned tires like these. Whoever had come here wasn't fishing, and they certainly weren't sightseeing during a flood. He photographed every angle before writing the coordinates into his notebook. Just as he slipped the notebook away, a scream. Faint, human. His head snapped toward the river. Again, desperate, he shoved the throttle forward. The rescue boat surged across violent current. Floating branches slammed against the hull. A whole tree drifted past, missing him by inches. Then he saw her. A tiny mound of earth barely visible above the flood. Standing on it was a woman, soaked from head to toe, waving both arms. The island beneath her feet was disappearing. "Hold on!" Caleb shouted. "I'm coming!" She tried stepping toward the edge. The muddy ground collapsed. Her foot slipped. She fell directly into the current. "No!" Caleb threw the boat sideways, reaching as far as he could. Their fingertips almost missed. Then he grabbed the sleeve of her jacket. The river yanked both of them violently. His left shoulder twisted backward. A sharp crack echoed through his body. Pain exploded down his arm. His grip weakened for only a fraction of a second. If he let go, she would disappear forever. Caleb planted one boot against the side of the boat and pulled with everything he had left. Every muscle screamed. His shoulder felt as though someone had driven a burning knife through it. The woman coughed violently as he dragged her across the gunwale. Both collapsed onto the aluminum floor. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Only the river roared around them. By the time they reached higher ground, Caleb's face had turned pale beneath his rain-soaked beard. He climbed out first, favoring his useless arm. The woman stared at him. "You got hurt." "It's nothing." It was an obvious lie. She looked about 30, dark hair plastered against her face, sharp, intelligent eyes. Her outdoor jacket was expensive, far beyond anything an ordinary traveler would wear. Everything about her suggested someone from a different world, one that didn't belong anywhere near this forgotten forest. Caleb shrugged off his own heavy rescue coat, despite the cold, and draped it over her shoulders. "The roads are gone," he said quietly. "You'll have to stay at my station until they're open." She hesitated before nodding. "Thank you." Her voice trembled. "My name is Olivia." Caleb. She never offered a last name. He never asked. Years in the wilderness had taught him something city people rarely understood. The forest revealed the truth eventually. Questions only made people lie sooner. The drive back was painfully slow. Olivia repeatedly lifted her phone toward the gray sky. "No signal," Caleb said. "There never is." She lowered the phone without another word. At the station, Caleb struggled to light the wood stove with one arm. She watched him quietly for a long moment. "Your shoulder's dislocated." "I've had worse." "You'll have permanent damage if you leave it." Her voice had changed, no longer frightened. Now it carried calm authority. "Sit down." Caleb hesitated. Something about the way she spoke reminded him of trauma nurses he'd worked beside during wildfire seasons. He finally obeyed. Seconds later, a loud pop, blinding pain, then sudden relief. He inhaled sharply. "You've done that before." "I've seen enough emergencies." She offered nothing more. As warmth slowly filled the cabin, Olivia wandered toward the wall where dozens of detailed forest maps hung beside shelves packed with incident reports, rescue logs, and fire records spanning nearly 2 decades. She studied them longer than Caleb expected. Much longer. Outside, floodwater continued creeping toward the cabin. Inside, the fire crackled gently. For the first time in years, another heartbeat echoed beneath this roof. Caleb believed he had rescued a stranger from the river. He had no idea that the flood had carried something far more dangerous than rising water. It had delivered the first crack in the life he had spent 20 years building. And neither of them knew who would drown first when the truth finally surfaced. Morning arrived wrapped in silver mist, while the last floodwater clung stubbornly to the roots of the towering pines. Caleb Brooks had slept no more than 3 hours. His shoulder throbbed every time he shifted on the narrow cot beside the stove, but years in wildfire service had taught him that pain was simply another weather condition. It arrived, it lingered, then, eventually, it passed. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the station before he even opened his eyes. For a brief, confusing moment, he thought he was dreaming. His wife had always risen before him. She used to hum softly while the coffee brewed, filling the lonely cabin with ordinary sounds that somehow made every dangerous day feel survivable. Then, reality settled over him. Emily was gone. She had been gone for 3 years. Caleb slowly sat up. Olivia stood near the stove wearing one of his oversized gray sweatshirts. Her soaked clothes from yesterday hung neatly beside the fire. "I hope you don't mind," she said with an apologetic smile. "I found coffee." "You found the good coffee." She looked guilty. "I figured if someone rescues my life, I owe him at least one decent breakfast." A faint smile appeared on Caleb's face before disappearing just as quickly. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to smile at another person. Almost. They ate in comfortable silence. Outside, muddy water still surrounded the station, making escape impossible. Fallen trees blocked every road leading back toward civilization. They were trapped together. Neither of them had any choice but to wait. "You've lived here a long time?" Olivia finally asked. 19 years. "By yourself?" "Mostly." She nodded slowly. "It doesn't get lonely?" Caleb stared through the window where sunlight struggled to break through the clouds. "It does." The honesty surprised even him. But loneliness eventually becomes another piece of furniture. After a while, you stop noticing it's there. Olivia looked down at her coffee. For a split second, sadness crossed her face. Not pity, recognition. After breakfast, Caleb grabbed his radio and rescue helmet. "I need to inspect the lookout tower before another storm rolls in." "You shouldn't be climbing with that shoulder." "I've climbed worse." She sighed. "You really don't know how to quit, do you?" "No." "That's either admirable or incredibly stubborn." "My wife used to say both." The words escaped before he realized it. Silence followed. "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered. "You don't have to be." But she could see in his eyes that he still carried grief the way old trees carried lightning scars, healed on the outside, forever split within. Before leaving, Caleb hesitated. "If you need anything, I'll be fine. You'll find books over there." He pointed toward an old bookshelf filled with forestry manuals, rescue journals, wildfire reports, maps, and decades of handwritten field logs. "I like reading." "I noticed," she smiled politely. Caleb disappeared into the trees. The sound of his truck faded, then vanished. The smile left Olivia's face immediately. She stood perfectly still until she was certain he was gone. Only then did she walk toward the office wall. Her expression transformed. The frightened survivor disappeared. In her place stood someone calm, focused, methodical. She studied the enormous forest map pinned across the wall, every fire break, every observation tower, every emergency road, every protected watershed, every section marked in different colors. Tiny handwritten notes filled the margins. She photographed everything. Then her attention shifted toward a filing cabinet. Locked. She examined it only briefly before noticing several thick binders stacked openly on the desk. Field reports, environmental complaints, illegal logging investigations. She opened the first binder. Her eyes widened. Photographs, coordinates, license plate numbers, financial records, satellite images, silently witness statements, everything meticulously organized. Whoever assembled these files wasn't merely suspicious, he had spent years building a legal case. Olivia turned another page. Another. Another. Her breathing slowed. This was far more extensive than she'd expected. One report described unauthorized access roads cut through protected woodland. Another connected heavy equipment to shell companies. Several included complaints filed with federal agencies. Each had been dismissed, each carefully documented. "He never stopped," she whispered. A sudden vibration startled her. She grabbed her phone, one weak signal bar, barely enough. She hurried outside toward a rocky overlook behind the station. The signal flickered, then held. She dialed a number from memory. The call connected almost instantly. "Olivia!" Her father's deep voice carried its usual authority. "I've been trying to reach you." "I'm safe." "Where?" "At the fire station." A pause. "With Brooks?" "Yes." Another silence, longer this time. "What have you learned?" Olivia glanced back toward the cabin. "He has everything." "What does that mean?" "Reports, photographs, records going back years." "Good." His answer came too quickly. "You know what to do." She closed her eyes. "He isn't what we expected." "Don't start that." "He saved my life." "He saved an inconvenience." Her father's voice hardened. "Don't confuse kindness with innocence." Olivia said nothing. "We're too close now," he continued. "Every month he delays us costs millions." "I understand." "Do you?" She looked toward the station. Smoke curled peacefully from the chimney. Inside sat a man who had offered his bed to a complete stranger, given away his only warm coat, and nearly drowned trying to save someone whose name he didn't even know. "I understand," she repeated quietly. The line disconnected. She remained standing there for nearly a minute. The wind carried the scent of wet pine through the clearing. Something inside her no longer felt as certain as it had before the flood. When she finally returned, she carefully replaced every binder exactly where she'd found it. Not one page out of place, not one chair moved, not one clue left behind. Late that afternoon, Caleb returned carrying broken radio equipment from the observation tower. "The tower's damaged," he said. "It'll need rebuilding before fire season." Olivia took the heavy toolbox from his good hand. "You shouldn't carry that." He laughed softly. "I've forgotten what it's like having someone worry about me." She looked at him for a long moment. Maybe she hadn't expected him to say that. Maybe she hadn't expected him to be exactly the kind of man her father had described. That evening they sat on the porch watching muddy water slowly retreat from the forest. Birdsong returned. Sunlight filtered through broken clouds. For a little while, the world almost looked peaceful again. Caleb believed the worst part of the storm was finally ending. He didn't know another storm had already entered his home. This one wore a grateful smile. And it carried no floodwater at all. Sunlight finally pierced the thinning clouds, but the forest still smelled of soaked earth, broken timber, and secrets that refused to wash away. By the fourth morning, the floodwater had dropped enough to expose patches of gravel road leading toward civilization. Caleb stood outside the station tightening the straps on Olivia's travel bag. He had washed away the dried mud the night before and repaired one of the torn shoulder straps with heavy rescue thread. It wasn't much. But taking care of broken things had become second nature. He couldn't save his wife. He couldn't save his family. So he repaired backpacks, boats, broken fences, fire towers, anything that still gave him a chance. Olivia stepped out onto the porch wearing her own clothes again. The expensive outdoor jacket had dried by the stove, looking almost new despite everything the river had thrown at it. "You fixed it," she said softly, noticing the strap. "It would have bothered me if I hadn't." She smiled. "You really don't know how to stop helping people." Caleb shrugged. "I never learned." The temporary bridge downstream had finally reopened. A rescue crew had cleared enough fallen trees for trucks to reach the outside world. It was time for her to leave. The drive lasted nearly 2 hours. Neither of them spoke much. The silence between strangers was easy. The silence between two people who had begun understanding each other was much heavier. As they drove through endless forests, Olivia suddenly asked, "Do you have any family?" Caleb tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "My daughter." "What does she do?" "Attorney." "Does she visit?" "No." Another long silence. "You miss her?" He let out a slow breath. "Every day." "What happened?" Caleb stared ahead. "After my wife died, Emma thought I chose this job over my family." "Did you?" The question caught him off guard. For several miles he didn't answer. Finally he spoke. "I chose responsibility." His voice was quiet. "But to someone who's grieving, responsibility and abandonment can look exactly the same." Olivia looked away. For reasons she couldn't explain, those words settled heavily inside her chest. When they reached the edge of town, a black, luxury SUV waited beside the road. Its polished paint reflected the morning sun. 2 men in tailored suits stepped out. Neither looked surprised to see Olivia. One hurried toward her. "Miss Witt!" She stopped him with the smallest shake of her head. The man instantly corrected himself. "Miss Olivia." Caleb noticed, just barely. The man almost said another name. Something wasn't right. Olivia turned toward Caleb. "Thank you," she hesitated, "for everything. You'll be okay?" "I will." She extended her hand. Instead of shaking it, Caleb pulled her into a brief, awkward hug. The gesture surprised both of them. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she slowly returned it. When she climbed into the SUV, she looked back through the tinted window. Caleb was already driving away. He never saw her watching until the road curved and the forest swallowed his truck. Neither of them noticed that one of the suited men quietly photographed Caleb's license plate before closing the door. Life at the station returned to its familiar rhythm. Or at least it tried to. The silence felt different now. The second coffee mug remained on the drying rack. A folded blanket still rested beside the stove. Sometimes Caleb caught himself expecting another voice inside the cabin. Then he remembered. She was gone. 3 days later, he sat at his desk writing flood recovery reports. Every damaged bridge, every washed-out trail, every rescue, every gallon of emergency fuel, every page carefully dated. Paperwork had never bothered him. Records protected honest people. Without proof, truth became only another opinion. The satellite radio crackled. "Captain Brooks." He picked up immediately. "This is Regional Command." "I'm here." "We've received notice of a formal environmental compliance inspection." Caleb frowned. "Inspection?" "Correct." "When?" "Next week." "Reason?" A pause answered him before the dispatcher finally spoke. "Another complaint." His pencil stopped moving. "What complaint?" "Improper management of protected wildlife areas." Caleb stared at the radio. "I've passed every inspection for 19 years." "I know." The dispatcher sounded uncomfortable. "I'm just delivering the notice." The transmission ended. Caleb leaned back slowly. Anonymous, that was new. Normally, the logging companies filed public complaints. They preferred intimidation, not secrecy. He reached for his incident journal and wrote one sentence. First anonymous complaint received 4 days after flood rescue. He circled it twice. Something in his gut refused to let it go. 2 days later, an old pickup truck rattled into the station yard. Frank Dawson climbed out. At nearly 70 years old, the retired forest ranger walked slower than he used to, but his eyes remained as sharp as ever. "You look terrible," Frank said. "I was going to say the same thing." Frank laughed before his expression grew serious. "I heard you pulled a woman out of the flood." News travels fast. In small towns, faster than wildfires. They sat outside beneath the evening sky drinking coffee. Caleb told him everything: the island, the rescue, the days at the station, the inspection notice. Frank listened without interrupting. Only once Caleb finished did the older man ask quietly, "What was her name?" "Olivia." "Last name?" "Never asked." Frank stared toward the tree line. "You should have." "Why?" "Because a black SUV matching that description belongs to one family." Caleb's heartbeat slowed. "What family?" Frank looked him directly in the eyes. "The Whitmores." The name landed like a stone. Everyone in the state knew Logan Whitmore: mining, timber, luxury resorts, political donations, billions of dollars. Frank continued. "His daughter disappeared for several days during the flood." Caleb felt the warmth leave his coffee. "You're saying—" "I'm saying the timing bothers me." Caleb immediately shook his head. "No." "Why not?" "Because she nearly died. People can almost die and still keep secrets." Frank stood and brushed dirt from his jeans. "I hope I'm wrong." "So do I." That night Caleb couldn't sleep. He replayed every conversation, every question Olivia had asked, the forest maps, the wildfire records, the reports stacked openly on his desk. She had been curious, very curious. He opened his notebook, one page after another. Then he stopped. Nearly every question she'd asked had centered on one subject: the protected forest, the federal investigations, the companies trying to buy the land, his reports, his evidence, his resistance. He had mistaken genuine interest for simple conversation. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the mountains. Unable to rest, Caleb walked toward the boat dock. His flashlight swept across the water, then froze. The rescue boat sat exactly where he'd left it. But something was terribly wrong. The powerful outboard engine was gone. The steel security lock still hung untouched, yet every mounting bolt had been removed with surgical precision. No broken metal, no damaged brackets, only an empty transom. Caleb dropped to one knee beside the muddy shoreline. Fresh tire tracks, aggressive off-road tread, the same pattern he had photographed the morning he found Olivia. He didn't curse. He didn't shout. He simply raised his camera, took photographs from every angle, measured every footprint, recorded the time, recorded the weather, recorded the direction they had left. Because experience had taught him one lesson above all others: when someone steals your equipment, they're after your property. When someone steals your ability to rescue people, they're preparing for something much bigger. The first cold wind after the flood carried the scent of drying pine. But Caleb Brooks knew danger rarely announced itself with smoke. He spent the next morning replacing the missing engine on his rescue boat with an old backup motor salvaged from storage. It was smaller, slower, and unreliable, but it would float. That was enough. As he tightened the final bolt, he noticed something unusual across the river. 4 freshly cut pine trees. They hadn't been there yesterday. Caleb crossed in the boat immediately. The cuts were clean, far too clean for storm damage. Each trunk had been sliced with industrial equipment before being left exactly where it fell. No logs had been taken. Nothing had been stolen. Someone had entered protected land simply to prove they could. He knelt beside one stump and touched the fresh sap still glistening in the morning light. The tree couldn't have been down for more than 12 hours. He photographed every angle, measured the tire impressions, collected fresh sawdust in an evidence bag. He had investigated enough wildfire arson cases to recognize intimidation when he saw it. This wasn't vandalism, it was a message. We can reach your forest whenever we choose. Back at the station, Caleb finished another detailed incident report before sealing copies inside waterproof folders. He mailed one to the regional office. Another went to a federal environmental investigator he trusted. The third remained locked inside his fireproof safe. Experience had taught him never to keep only one copy of the truth. That afternoon, an unfamiliar luxury pickup climbed the gravel road toward the station. It was spotless despite the muddy roads. A man stepped out wearing polished boots, an expensive jacket, and the confident smile of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "My name's Daniel Harper." Caleb waited. "I'm representing several private investors interested in recreational development." "You drove 3 hours to tell me that?" Daniel laughed politely. "I'd rather discuss it inside." "We can talk out here." Daniel glanced around at the endless forest. "Beautiful property." "It isn't mine." "Maybe not legally," his smile widened, "but you've certainly become attached." Caleb folded his arms. "What do you want?" Daniel opened a leather briefcase. Inside lay several neatly organized folders. One contained photographs of luxury mountain resorts, another displayed architectural renderings of hunting lodges, private cabins, helicopter pads, and exclusive fishing retreats. "Our clients believe this region has tremendous economic potential. They're welcome to believe whatever they like. They're also prepared to compensate anyone willing to help modernize it." Caleb remained silent. Daniel removed a single envelope. "You've devoted almost 20 years to this place." He placed the envelope on the porch railing. 3 years' salary. In cash. No investigations. No legal battles. No stress. You retire with dignity. Caleb didn't even glance inside. "What happens to the forest?" "The forest evolves." "No. The economy evolves. The community benefits. Jobs, tourism, opportunity." Caleb slowly picked up the envelope. For one brief second, Daniel smiled. Then Caleb handed it back. "You should leave." Daniel's expression hardened. "Think carefully." "I already have." "You're one man." Caleb looked beyond him toward the towering pines. "Exactly." Daniel slipped the envelope back into his briefcase. "Our clients don't enjoy being embarrassed. They'll call again." "They don't need to." Caleb's voice remained calm. "My answer won't change." Daniel climbed back into the truck. Before closing the door, he lowered the window. "By the way, you rescued someone during the flood." Caleb's heartbeat paused. Daniel continued casually, "Kindness has a way of becoming expensive." The truck disappeared in a cloud of dust. Caleb stood motionless long after it vanished. He hadn't told anyone about the rescue except Frank. So how did these people know? That evening, Frank Dawson arrived carrying 2 fishing poles and a paper sack full of sandwiches. He immediately noticed Caleb's expression. "They came, didn't they?" Caleb nodded. "They offered money." Frank sighed. "I figured they'd skip the threats first." "They already know about Olivia." Frank looked toward the trees before speaking quietly. "I made a few phone calls." "And?" "The woman you rescued," he hesitated. "She's definitely Logan Whitmore's daughter." Caleb closed his eyes. The confirmation hurt more than he expected. "I kept hoping everyone was wrong." "So did I." Frank sat beside him on the porch. "You know what bothers me?" "What?" "She stayed 3 days. Most people would have left the first chance they got." Caleb stared into the fading sunlight. "I've been thinking about that." She asked about your reports? Every one. Your investigations? Yes. The protected land? Yes. Frank nodded slowly. Then she wasn't stranded by accident. The words settled like cold ash. For the first time, Caleb replayed every conversation without emotion. Every innocent question. Every curious glance. Every long look at the maps. Every pause beside his filing cabinet. He suddenly realized something that made his stomach tighten. He had never once caught Olivia lying, because she had rarely volunteered information. She had simply allowed him to keep talking. 3 days later, another certified letter arrived. This one came directly from the regional office. Caleb opened it carefully. His eyes moved across the page. Administrative review, equipment mismanagement, improper record-keeping, unauthorized wildlife access, failure to follow emergency protocols. Each accusation referenced real incidents. Every conclusion was completely false. Someone had studied his career carefully before writing them. The paperwork looked official, professional, almost impossible to dismiss. He laughed once. Not because it was funny, because the attack had become frighteningly organized. That evening he drove into town to visit the volunteer fire station. Several firefighters who had worked beside him for years suddenly became strangely quiet when he entered. Conversations stopped. People looked away. Only one younger firefighter approached him. "Captain, I don't believe any of this." Caleb nodded. "I know. They're saying investigators might suspend you. They can investigate whatever they want." The young firefighter hesitated. "My dad always said if Caleb Brooks wrote something in a report, you could carve it into stone." Caleb smiled faintly. "Your dad gave me too much credit." No, he didn't. For a moment, Caleb remembered why he had stayed all these years. Not for awards, not for promotions, not even for the forest. He stayed because protecting something bigger than yourself gave life meaning. When he returned home after dark, another surprise waited. Fresh boot prints circled the station. Someone had walked completely around the building, not trying to hide, not trying to break in, just making sure he noticed. Near the back porch lay a single burned matchstick. Nothing else. Caleb picked it up carefully. Another message. Another warning. He carried it inside and sealed it inside an evidence bag. Then he unlocked the fireproof safe. Inside were nearly 20 years of wildfire reports, rescue records, environmental complaints, photographs, witness statements, and handwritten journals. He looked at them for a long time. Every page represented another season, another fire, another rescue, another promise kept. If they wanted this forest, they first had to erase 20 years of truth. Outside, darkness swallowed the trees. Somewhere beyond the station, an unseen engine started. Its sound faded slowly into the night. Caleb switched off the lights but remained awake, sitting beside the window with his old service flashlight resting across his lap. For the first time since becoming captain, he wasn't waiting for wildfire. He was waiting for people. Deep in his heart, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The real battle hadn't begun when someone stole his boat engine. It had begun the moment he pulled a stranger from the flood and unknowingly welcomed the enemy into his home. Rain no longer flooded the forest, but another storm had settled over Caleb Brooks's life, a quieter one that left no mud behind, only doubt. The official suspension notice arrived on a Monday morning. It came in a certified envelope stamped with federal seals and language so cold it felt mechanical. Pending investigation, Captain Caleb Brooks is relieved of all active wildfire and rescue duties. He read the letter twice, not because he didn't understand it, because after 19 years of answering every emergency call, it was impossible to imagine waking up without a purpose. He folded the document carefully and placed it beside the dozens of incident reports he had written over the years. Outside, the station looked exactly the same. The flag still waved, the lookout tower still overlooked miles of untouched forest, the rescue truck still waited beside the garage. Only one thing had changed. The man responsible for protecting it was no longer allowed to do so. The first bulldozer tracks appeared 2 days later. Caleb wasn't officially on patrol anymore, but habit pulled him into the woods every morning before sunrise. He walked quietly through familiar trails until something unusual caught his attention. Fresh tire marks. Far too large for recreational vehicles. Heavy construction equipment. He crouched beside the deep impressions pressed into the damp soil. They hadn't been there yesterday. Following the tracks another half-mile, he stopped behind a cluster of pines. Several orange survey ribbons fluttered from tree branches. Small metal stakes had been hammered into the ground. Somebody had already begun marking sections of protected forest. Not after winning. Before winning. "They're not waiting for permission anymore," Caleb whispered. He photographed everything: coordinates, measurements, equipment tracks, the cut survey lines, the damage to vegetation. Even suspended, he documented everything exactly as he always had. Truth didn't stop mattering because someone signed a piece of paper. That evening, Frank Dawson arrived carrying an old cardboard box. "I found these in my attic." Inside were faded newspaper clippings, photographs, letters. One article showed a much younger Caleb standing beside a burned hillside after saving an entire campground from a wildfire. Another pictured him carrying an exhausted child away from a collapsing cabin. "You've forgotten how many lives you've saved," Frank said. "I haven't." "Then why do you look like you've already lost?" Caleb stared silently at the photographs. "I know these people." "So do I." "They all moved on." Frank nodded. "That's what saved people are supposed to do." He leaned forward. "But who saves the man who keeps saving everyone else?" The question lingered long after Frank left. Late that night, Caleb unlocked the storage room beneath the station. Dust covered shelves packed with neatly labeled boxes. Every wildfire season, every flood, every rescue mission, every inspection, every complaint, every photograph, 19 years of records. His late wife had often teased him. "You save everything." He used to laugh. "You never know when you'll need it." Now he understood. He had been preparing for this battle without realizing it. He carried box after box into the office. Stacks of journals soon covered every available surface. Handwritten field logs, GPS coordinates, drone images, witness statements, federal correspondence, equipment inventories, thousands of pages. The story of one man's life. Only one person could understand what those records meant: Emma, his daughter. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. Their last conversation replayed with painful clarity. The funeral, the rain, her trembling voice. "You always chose fires over birthdays." "I was doing my job. You chose this station over Mom. That's not fair. You always had another emergency." She drove away before dawn. Neither had reached out afterward. Pride had built a wall neither knew how to climb. Caleb picked up his phone. Emma's number still sat at the top of his favorites list. He had never deleted it. His thumb hovered over the call button. Not yet. He lowered the phone again. The next morning he drove into town to scan his records. Most government offices suddenly treated him like a stranger. Conversations stopped when he entered. People looked away. Only Lisa, the administrative assistant who had worked with him for years, greeted him normally. "I heard about your suspension." "So did everyone else." "I'm sorry. It isn't your fault." She helped him feed hundreds of pages into the scanner. Hour after hour. Wildfire maps, incident reports, inspection certificates, letters from federal agencies, photographs documenting illegal logging. Every file became a digital copy. When the final document finished uploading, Lisa looked at him. "Who are you sending all this to?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he typed a familiar email address. Emma.Brooks at... He attached everything. Nearly 20 years, thousands of pages, no explanation, just one sentence. "I should have asked for your help a long time ago." His finger hesitated above the send button, then he pressed it. The message disappeared. There was no taking it back. He barely made it home before the phone rang, an unfamiliar Seattle area code. Caleb's heartbeat quickened. He answered immediately. There was silence. Then a calm, professional voice. "This is Emma Brooks." For a moment he couldn't speak. She sounded older, stronger, more distant than he remembered. "It's me." "I know." Another silence. "I received your files." "I'm sorry." "For sending them?" "For waiting 3 years." Emma didn't respond. Instead she asked, "Do you still have the originals?" "Every single one." "Good." Her voice shifted, no longer the daughter. Now she sounded like the attorney she had become. "I've only reviewed part of what you sent." "And?" "Dad," she paused, "this isn't random harassment." "I figured. This is an organized attempt to remove you legally before they take the land." Caleb closed his eyes. "I thought so." "No, you suspected." "I know." He leaned against the kitchen counter. "What should I do?" "First, don't sign anything." "I won't." "Second, don't throw away a single receipt, note, journal, photograph, or email." "I've kept everything." "I noticed." A faint softness entered her voice. "You documented 19 years better than most corporations document 1. He almost smiled. "Your mother used to say I never threw anything away." "I'm glad you didn't." Another silence followed. This one felt different, less hostile, less painful. Finally, Emma spoke again. "I'm coming." Caleb's chest tightened. "You don't have to." "Yes. It could get dangerous. So could standing in front of a wildfire. You taught me that." He lowered his head. The words caught him completely off guard. "When?" "I'll leave tomorrow morning." "It'll take almost 2 days to drive." "I know." "I'll be there." The line disconnected. Caleb remained standing in the quiet station. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly beneath the evening sky. For the first time since Emily's funeral, hope entered the cabin before another emergency did. He looked toward the empty chair where his wife had once sat drinking coffee. "I think she's coming home," he whispered. The wind rustled softly through the pines outside, almost like an answer. Far away, on a highway stretching toward the mountains, Emma Brooks packed her briefcase, closed her law office, and started the engine. She wasn't just driving toward a forest. She was driving toward the father she had spent 3 years trying to forget. Neither of them knew that by the time she arrived, the people trying to steal the forest would already have made their boldest move. A cold sunrise painted the mountains gold. But beneath the beauty, engines had already begun carving invisible wounds into the forest. Caleb Brooks barely slept the night before. Emma was somewhere on the highway, driving toward him after 3 years of silence, while somewhere else, people with money and influence were moving faster than ever. Before daylight fully broke, he hiked back to the area where he had discovered the bulldozer tracks. The damage had grown. Fresh survey stakes stretched deeper into the protected woodland. Bright orange ribbons hung from branches like warning flags. Tire tracks crossed a stream that no heavy equipment had permission to enter. Caleb photographed every detail. The destruction wasn't massive yet. That was the frightening part. They were preparing. He knew wildfires well enough to recognize the earliest spark before the forest exploded into flames. This felt exactly the same. Only this fire wore expensive suits. Just after noon, a dusty SUV turned into the fire station. Emma stepped out first. She was 31 now. Her dark blazer had been replaced by jeans and hiking boots for the long drive, but she still carried herself like an attorney entering a courtroom. She looked at the station for a long moment before turning toward her father. Neither moved. 3 years of hurt stood silently between them. Finally, Caleb spoke. "You made good time." Emma smiled faintly. "You still don't know how to start difficult conversations." "No. I guess I never learned." For the first time in years, they laughed at the same moment. The awkwardness didn't disappear, but it cracked. Caleb stepped forward. So... She finally closed the distance herself and wrapped her arms around him. He hesitated only a heartbeat before embracing his daughter. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Emma closed her eyes. "I know." Those 2 words carried 3 years of pain and the beginning of forgiveness. Inside the station, stacks of journals covered nearly every table. Emma spent hours reviewing documents while Caleb brewed coffee. She worked exactly like her mother had. Quiet, focused, patient. Every few minutes she placed another sticky note onto a report. "This inspection violated procedure. This complaint has no witness. They ignored your photographic evidence. This timeline doesn't match." By sunset, one corner of the table had become an organized legal case. Emma leaned back. "This isn't just harassment." "I figured." "No," she shook her head. "This is coordinated." She spread several reports side by side. "Every accusation appears within days of one of your environmental complaints." She placed another folder beside them. "Different agencies. Different investigators. Different signatures. But they're following the exact same pattern." Caleb frowned. "So they're working together?" "I think someone is feeding them information. Someone who knows your routines." His expression darkened. "You mean someone inside the system?" Emma nodded slowly. "I can't prove it yet, but I will." Hundreds of miles away, Olivia Whitmore stood inside the top floor of her father's corporate headquarters. The panoramic windows overlooked an impressive skyline. Normally the view calmed her. Today it made her feel trapped. Logan Whitmore entered without knocking. "The reports?" "I sent everything." "The maps?" "Yes." "The fire station?" "Everything you asked." He smiled with satisfaction. "I knew I could count on you." Olivia didn't answer. Instead, she remembered Caleb repairing her backpack before she left. She remembered him giving away his only warm coat. She remembered him apologizing because breakfast wasn't anything special. None of it matched the monster her father had described. Logan noticed her silence. "What's wrong?" "He doesn't seem dangerous." Her father's smile vanished. "Danger doesn't always carry a gun. He has evidence. He stands in our way. He almost drowned saving me." Logan walked closer. "He chose to." "You didn't ask him to." "No." He straightened his tie. "But now his kindness has become our opportunity." Those words settled heavily inside Olivia. For the first time, they sounded cruel. Back at the station, Emma received an encrypted email from an unfamiliar sender. There was no signature. Only one sentence. "He isn't the criminal. Look at Project Cedar Ridge." Attached was a single spreadsheet. Emma opened it. Dozens of shell companies, equipment leases, payments routed through multiple contractors. One name appeared again and again: Whitmore Natural Resources. Emma immediately called Caleb over. "Have you ever heard of Cedar Ridge?" He studied the screen. "No. But I know every section of this forest." "There isn't any Cedar Ridge here." "Exactly." Emma zoomed into one document. The project location listed federal coordinates inside the protected forest. "They're using a fake project name." Caleb's jaw tightened. "To hide illegal work." Emma nodded. "They're disguising conservation land as private development." "If we can prove that..." The whole operation begins to collapse. That evening, Frank Dawson arrived carrying a homemade pie. He froze when he saw Emma. "You've grown up." Emma smiled warmly. "You still bring pie instead of good advice?" Frank laughed. "Some habits are worth keeping." The three of them spent hours comparing maps, old fire breaks, historical access roads, former logging trails. Suddenly, Frank stopped. "Wait!" He pointed toward an abandoned maintenance road. "This route hasn't been used in 15 years. Caleb looked closer. "It's the only road wide enough for heavy equipment." Emma circled it with a red marker. "If they're bringing machinery in, it'll come through here." The room fell silent. For the first time, they weren't reacting anymore. They were thinking ahead. Late that night, Olivia sat alone in her apartment. Sleep wouldn't come. She opened the photographs she had secretly taken inside Caleb's station. Instead of sending them to her father again, she studied them herself. One picture showed dozens of rescue medals hanging quietly beside old wildfire helmets. Another captured a faded family photograph on a bookshelf. Caleb, his wife, a teenage Emma, all smiling. The date in the corner was nearly 10 years old. Olivia stared at it far longer than she intended. She suddenly realized something that unsettled her more than any corporate meeting ever had. Her father had spoken about land, permits, obstacles. Caleb had never spoken about money once. Only people, only forests, only responsibility. She picked up her phone. Her father's number appeared at the top of the screen. Instead, she closed the contacts list. Then she opened a secure storage drive hidden behind several encrypted folders. One by one, she began copying confidential company files. Financial records, internal emails, survey contracts, environmental assessments, everything connected to Project Cedar Ridge. Her hands trembled. She wasn't ready to betray her father. But for the first time in her life, she was no longer certain he deserved her loyalty. As the final file finished copying, a notification flashed across her computer. "Unauthorized access detected. Security has been notified." Olivia's heart stopped. Somewhere inside the building, an elevator door opened. Footsteps echoed down the hallway toward her office. She quietly pulled the flash drive from her computer and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Someone was coming. The first wildfire of the season began with a thin ribbon of smoke rising beyond the eastern ridge, so small that most people would have mistaken it for morning fog. Caleb Brooks knew better. Smoke always told a story. The question was whether someone had written it by accident or on purpose. He and Emma were studying survey maps when Frank burst through the station door without knocking. "Fire!" Caleb was already reaching for his boots. "They've spotted flames near the abandoned maintenance road." The same road, the only route wide enough to bring heavy machinery into the protected forest. Emma looked at him. "They're destroying evidence." Caleb nodded once. "They're trying to." Although officially suspended, every instinct in his body screamed to move. He grabbed his old fire pack. "I'm going." Dad! I know I don't have authority anymore. He looked toward the window where black smoke climbed steadily into the sky. But that forest doesn't know I've been suspended. Emma didn't argue. She simply handed him the truck keys. Come back! Miles away, alarms echoed through Whitmore Natural Resources headquarters. Logan Whitmore stood inside the security office, furious. Find her! She couldn't have gotten far. Security teams searched every floor, every parking garage, every stairwell, but Olivia was already gone. She had slipped out through the loading dock wearing a maintenance jacket she had borrowed from an unsuspecting employee. The flash drive rested inside her pocket. Every illegal payment, every forged environmental report, every secret agreement, years of corruption now fit into something smaller than her thumb. Her phone rang. Her father's name filled the screen. She let it ring, then turned it off forever. At the fire station, Emma received a message from an unknown number. I have the evidence. I need Caleb Brooks, alone. Attached were GPS coordinates. Emma stared at the screen. Dad. Caleb read the message. It's Olivia. You can't know that. No. But I believe it. Frank frowned. It could be a trap. It probably is. Emma stepped between them. Then you're not going alone. They found Olivia waiting inside an abandoned ranger cabin near the old maintenance road. She looked exhausted. Her clothes were dirty. There were bruises on one arm. They followed me, she said before anyone spoke. I barely got away. Caleb studied her quietly. You came back. She nodded. I should have told the truth the day you pulled me out of that river. Tears filled her eyes. You saved my life. And I nearly destroyed yours. She removed the flash drive from her pocket. This is everything. Emma accepted it carefully. Financial records? Olivia nodded. Internal emails. Survey contracts. Bribes. The fake Cedar Ridge project. Everything. Emma immediately opened her laptop. Minutes passed. File after file appeared. Bank transfers, executive signatures, environmental studies rewritten before submission. Photographs proving illegal clearing had already begun months earlier. Then Emma found the document that changed everything. A signed order authorizing contractors to ignite a controlled burn inside protected land. Today's date, today's location. Her heart stopped. This fire, she looked at Caleb, it wasn't accidental. The smoke outside thickened rapidly. Wind pushed flames toward thousands of acres of untouched timber, toward nearby communities, toward volunteer firefighters who had no idea the fire had been deliberately started. Caleb stood. I'm ending this. Emma grabbed his arm. You don't have authority. I don't need authority. I need water. He smiled gently. You know what your mother used to tell me? Emma shook her head. If people need you, you never wait for permission. The old wildfire captain returned, not because someone reinstated him, because people were in danger. Volunteer crews immediately rallied behind him. Young firefighters who had learned from Caleb ignored the suspension and followed his directions without hesitation. Cut a fire break there! Protect the creek! Keep those homes wet! His voice carried the same confidence it always had. Years disappeared. The forest remembered him, so did the people. Meanwhile, Emma transmitted every document to federal investigators, the FBI, and the Environmental Protection Agency. Within an hour, search warrants were issued. Agents were already moving. Logan Whitmore tried to leave by helicopter. He never made it. Federal vehicles blocked the road leading to the private landing site. Agents surrounded him before the rotors even began turning. You have the right to remain silent. Logan looked toward the burning mountains. For the first time in decades, money couldn't buy another escape. By sunset, the fire was finally contained. Hundreds of firefighters stood exhausted beneath smoke-stained skies. The forest had lost trees, but it had not lost its heart. A week later, Caleb's suspension was officially lifted. Every accusation against him collapsed under Emma's evidence. The anonymous complaints, the fabricated inspections, the stolen equipment, the intimidation campaign, everything unraveled. Several government officials resigned, others faced criminal charges alongside Logan Whitmore. The Cedar Ridge project was permanently cancelled. The protected forest remained exactly what it had always been: protected. Olivia testified in court. She never tried to excuse what she had done. "I chose silence when I should have chosen truth." She accepted responsibility for her role and cooperated fully with investigators. After the trials ended, she declined every position offered by her father's former company. Instead, she accepted a modest job with a non-profit organization dedicated to restoring damaged forests. She knew redemption wasn't something anyone could hand her. It had to be earned, one tree at a time. Several months later, autumn painted the forest in gold and crimson. Emma had moved into a small cabin only a few miles from the fire station. She still practiced environmental law, but now she did much of her work remotely. On quiet evenings, she and Caleb shared coffee on the porch where he had once sat alone. One afternoon, she found him repairing another torn backpack. She laughed. "You still fix everything." He smiled. "I'm trying." She slipped her arm through his. "You know, I used to think you loved this forest more than you loved Mom and me." Caleb lowered his eyes. "I know. I was wrong." He looked at her, surprised. "You never loved the forest instead of us." "You protected it. Because protecting people was the only way you knew how to love." For a long moment, neither spoke. The words healed something neither apology had been able to reach. Across the valley, children hiked along newly reopened trails. Families gathered beside clear streams. The old lookout tower stood proudly against the evening sky. Life had returned. Caleb watched the sun disappear beyond the trees his team had spent years defending. Emily had once told him that forests remembered every season. He finally understood. They remembered loss. They remembered fire. They remembered those who refused to abandon them. Just as people did. As the first stars appeared overhead, Emma placed a fresh mug of coffee beside her father. Neither of them needed to say another word. The silence that once belonged to loneliness now belonged to peace. And somewhere deep within the forest, the wind moved gently through the pines, carrying no smoke this time. Only the quiet promise that some things are worth protecting for an entire lifetime. Before we say goodbye, remember this. Sometimes God's greatest miracles don't arrive as flashes of light or impossible wonders. Sometimes they come disguised as ordinary moments. A stranger who stops to help. A hand that refuses to let go. A heart willing to forgive. Or the courage to stand for what is right when no one else will. Caleb believed he was protecting a forest, but God was quietly restoring something even greater. He was healing a broken family, changing a wounded heart, and proving that kindness is never wasted. We may not see his plan while we are walking through the storm, but in time, we often discover that every difficult step was leading us somewhere we never could have reached on our own. If you're carrying pain today, don't lose hope. Keep choosing compassion over bitterness, truth over fear, and faith over despair. The seeds of goodness you plant today may become tomorrow's miracle, for you or for someone whose life you may never fully know. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to support our channel. Your support allows us to continue creating stories that inspire hope, faith, and kindness around the world. I'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, or share a time when God surprised you with hope during a difficult season. Your story may encourage someone else who needs it today. May God bless you and your family with peace, good health, strength, and joyful hearts. May He watch over your home, guide your steps, and fill your days with hope, no matter what challenges you face. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may God's grace be with you always.